I recently went back and played The Walking Dead: A New Frontier because I noticed I had played 3 of the 5 episodes years ago and never finished it. I played through 2 remaining episodes, and while it didn't blow me away, it reminded me why I loved Telltale's games. And it made me miss them. There was a time when this company was on top of the world, and now they just cannot seem to get it together. How did it all go so wrong? Telltale was founded in 2005 by a group of former LucasArts devs. They have always been a studio that makes adventure games based on existing IPs. They started with smaller IPs like Sam and Max and Homestar Runner. Then they started to go bigger with Back to the Future and Jurassic Park. But their first major hit was with The Walking Dead. This game would really set the baseline for what the next several years of Telltale Games would look like. It was an episodic game with the episodes being released periodically. The gameplay was very simple, with much of the game almost playing out like an interactive movie. The player would get to choose how to respond as things played out. There were some times when the players would get to walk around and interact with things, but much of the game was this interactive movie style. What made The Walking Dead so notable was that the story would change based on the choices you made. And what was great was that this wasn't just a marketing ploy, the story really would change. Entire main characters could live or die in your story based on these changes. I became a lifelong Telltale fan after playing The Walking Dead. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I can't think of many games that have gotten me more attached to its characters than this one. I can't think of many games that have had me more invested with its story than this one, and I can't think of many games with a more emotional ending than this one. I always say if there was one game I could go back in time and experience all over again without remembering anything, I think I would pick The Walking Dead. I could not wait to see what Telltale did next. Their next 2 games were The Wolf Among Us and The Walking Dead Season 2. Both of these games were also great. I especially love The Wolf Among Us. I could probably make an entire video about how great that game is, so let me just move on. But I mentioned these 2 games specifically because I feel what came after them is what caused Telltale's downfall. After the success Telltale was having with The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us, a lot of other IPs wanted their turn with Telltale. And Telltale was apparently happy to work with all of them. In fact, I think they were a little bit too happy. From November 2014 to December 2017, Telltale released Tales from the Borderlands, Game of Thrones, Minecraft Story Mode, The Walking Dead Michonne, Batman, The Walking Dead: A New Frontier, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Minecraft Story Mode Season 2. That is 8 games in 3 years. That's absurd. It almost doesn't even sound real. I really don't even know how they managed that, considering they weren't the biggest team in the world. Telltale really should have been more selective with the games that they were willing to take on. I understand it may be difficult to turn down these studios with major IPs asking you to make a game. And I'm sure the developers were genuinely very excited to be given the opportunity to work on something as big as Game of Thrones or Batman. But it was just way too much. And I don't want to get too negative because all of these games are still good at their core. I especially really loved Tales from the Borderlands. I also think I enjoyed the Batman game, although if I'm honest, I don't really remember much. Despite all the games still being good, they weren't really great anymore. And Telltale released so many games in such a short period of time that they all started to blend together. One major issue with Telltale taking on so many projects at once is that it was causing a lot of delays. And remember, Telltale released their games episodically. This meant there would often be weeks or even months between episodes as Telltale struggled to handle all of these projects. It's asking a lot of your players to expect them to stay connected to these characters and remember the ongoing story for such a long amount of time. Many players would start dropping out of these series as the delays came, and that's exactly what happened to me with The Walking Dead: A New Frontier. Another issue that came from having this many projects at once was player fatigue. All of these games were extremely similar, and players were getting tired of this formula. Something that was once unique with the original Walking Dead game was becoming stale. And it didn't help that other games with similar styles were starting to come out from companies that weren't even Telltale, such as Life is Strange. When you combine all of the games Telltale was making, and then you add in the other copycat games coming out, there was just way too many of these episodic adventure games. Things were starting to get bad for Telltale at this point. These issues I've stated were making their games less popular, and most of their games were not even making a profit. Out of all these games I mentioned, it is said that only The Walking Dead Season 1 and Minecraft Story Mode made a profit. This makes me even more confused as to why Telltale kept taking on so many projects. Not to mention, they spent so much time and money on games that people really weren't asking for. In my opinion, Telltale fans really only wanted The Wolf Among Us 2 and a conclusion to the Walking Dead story. But instead, Telltale lost focus. I imagine this was just a case of bad management. Whoever was in charge of the decisions at the time was way too quick to accept any IP that came their way without thinking about the money interest, or resources necessary to make that happen. As all of these issues started to build, Telltale was really struggling, and in October 2018, they made the shocking announcement that they would be filing for bankruptcy. It really feels like Telltale was on top of the world in 2012 and 2013, but their eyes just got a little bit too wide, I think. Telltale did not immediately fully shut down after the bankruptcy announcement, but basically every employee was let go. Over 200 people lost their jobs, and only a small team of about 25 people were left, and they were just there to complete contractual obligations. The last 2 episodes of The Walking Dead, the final season, were completed by Skybound Games, and just like that, it seemed like it was over for Telltale. But in 2019, LCG Entertainment bought the studio and revived the Telltale Games name. Unfortunately, they had lost the license to most of the IPs that they were going to work with. This meant that planned games were canceled, including Game of Thrones Season 2 and Stranger Things. But there was one bright spot of hope. LCG Entertainment was able to keep The Wolf Among Us. This paved the way for their official announcement at the Game Awards 2019 that The Wolf Among Us 2 was in development. This was a great day to be a Telltale fan. Not only was Telltale back, but they were finally going to make the game that we really wanted all along. Sadly, this story does not yet have a happy ending. The Wolf Among Us 2 was announced in 2019, and as you may have noticed, it is now 2023, and we have seen nothing else from the game. Telltale has released one new game since returning. The Expanse, a Telltale series, was released throughout 2023. I have not played this game, so I can't comment, but it did get decent reviews. The game may be good, but I'm confused as to how this was the game we got first when it was announced 2 years after The Wolf Among Us. And I would have to assume that this game was not a commercial success, as Telltale recently announced another line of layoffs. Now, layoffs have been hitting almost every tech company, so while this may not be a Telltale specific issue, I'm still worried. It's been almost 4 years since The Wolf Among Us 2 was announced. Telltale has assured us that the game is still in development on multiple occasions, but I've become extremely worried that this game may actually never come out. And even if the game does eventually release, with all the staff changes over the years, I'm not sure it will even be the same. I miss Telltale. It was so much fun playing these games during their prime. I have so many great memories, not just from playing these games, but also watching YouTubers play these games. These games were perfect for YouTube and Twitch because you could see what choices the content creators made and see their reactions to certain parts of the story. Telltale really was a huge part of internet culture and the gaming industry in the 2010s. That's what makes watching their downfall so sad. I truly hope they can get it together and release a quality game with The Wolf Among Us 2.